Imagine waking up in the Stone Age. No shops, no running water, no toilet as you know it, and of course, no toilet paper. So what do? Grab a handful of leaves, some moss, a smooth stone? Now jump forward to ancient Rome. Public toilets already exist. There is running water and even a sewer system. But instead of a soft roll of paper, someone may hand you a sponge attached to a long wooden stick. And there is a chance someone else used that sponge before you. Today, we are going to travel through almost the entire history of human civilization and find out what people used in the bathroom in different eras. From stones, broken pottery, and wooden sticks, to the first sheets of paper and the modern toilet roll. By the end of a more gentle, modern set of conveniences, by the end of this journey, ordinary toilet paper may start to feel like one of humanity's greatest inventions. Let's begin in the Stone Age. We cannot know for certain what people used tens of thousands of years ago. Leaves, grass, moss, and small pieces of wood decompose quickly. That means archaeologists rarely find them near ancient campsites. But we can make a reasonable guess. People used whatever was available around them. If they lived near a river, water was probably the simplest option. In a forest, there were leaves, soft grass, and moss. In colder regions, there was snow. And in places where very little grew, smooth stones, shells, or pieces of wood may have been the only practical choices. There were no advertisements and no debate about 2-ply versus 3-ply. Your options depended entirely on what you could find nearby. In a way, the world's first bathroom kit was chosen by geography. Live near a forest and you had one set of options. Live near the sea and you had another. Live in the middle of a desert, and things became much more difficult. Over time, people began building permanent settlements and eventually cities. And that created a new problem. If only a few people live in one place, waste can simply be left far away from the camp. But once hundreds or thousands of people share the same area, that approach stops working. Cesspits appeared, along with dedicated toilet spaces and some of the earliest systems for carrying waste away. But there was still no universal hygiene product. People continued using water, cloth, and whatever natural materials were available. Money also mattered. A wealthy person might be able to use soft fabric or wool. For someone poor, cloth was far too valuable. It was worn, repaired, washed, and reused. Throwing away a perfectly good piece of fabric after a single use would have seemed unbelievably wasteful. So most people chose whatever cost nothing. And some of those choices were not exactly comfortable. In ancient Greece, people may have used small, smooth stones for personal hygiene. But an even more unusual option was something called pessoi. Rounded pieces of pottery. Basically, people took broken ceramic, shaped the fragments into smoother pieces, and tried to remove the sharp edges. Once that was done, the object was ready to use. To a modern person, even thinking about that sounds painful. But pottery did have a few advantages. It was free, it did not rot, and it was available in almost every city. A broken plate could no longer be used at the dinner table, but it could still be given another purpose. Archaeologists have found rounded ceramic pieces inside ancient latrines. There is even an image on an ancient Greek cup that appears to show someone using one of these objects. Today, people argue over whether 2-ply or 3-ply paper is better. Back then, the premium version may simply have been a well-polished piece of broken pottery. Now let's move on to ancient Rome. The Romans built large public toilets. Some were long stone benches with a row of openings. No private stalls, no doors, no little lock to check twice. People sat next to each other, talked, exchanged news, and sometimes even discussed business. For a Roman, going to the toilet could be almost as social as visiting a public bath. One of the most famous objects associated with these toilets was a wooden stick with a sea sponge attached to the end. It is often called a tersorium. The usual story is that people used the sponge instead of paper, then rinsed it in water, salt water, or vinegar. After that, the next visitor may have used the same sponge. Yes, it may have been shared. At this point, an ordinary paper roll starts to look like a luxury product. But there is an important detail. Archaeologists have never found a complete sponge on a stick preserved from Roman times. Wood and natural sponge do not survive particularly well for 2,000 years. Because of that, researchers still debate whether the tool was used on the body or whether it was mainly used to clean the toilet itself. Ancient texts mention a similar object, but we still do not have a final answer. So the story of the shared Roman sponge may be true, but I still would not recommend traveling back in time to test it personally. While people across Europe and Asia were still improvising, China was already moving toward the solution that would eventually become familiar to the entire world.
About 2,000 years ago, people traveled along the Silk Road. Journeys could take months. Travelers needed stations where they could eat, rest, change horses, and use a toilet. At one such station in northwestern China, archaeologists discovered a group of unusual objects. They were wooden and bamboo sticks, with one end wrapped in cloth. They had been used for personal hygiene. But the most interesting discovery came when researchers examined the surviving material under a microscope. They found the eggs of several types of intestinal parasites. So these ordinary toilet sticks helped researchers understand how disease may have traveled with people. A traveler could cross enormous distances, stop at different stations, and leave behind more than just the traces of a journey. An object that seemed completely ordinary 2,000 years ago has now helped reconstruct the history of disease transmission along the Silk Road.
China is where people began moving much closer to the solution we know today. Paper appeared there long before it became an affordable everyday material in many other parts of the world. One of the best-known written references dates to the year 589. The Chinese scholar Yan Zhitui wrote that he would not dare use paper for toilet purposes if it contained the names of respected scholars or quotations from important books. Notice what he does not explain. He does not explain that paper can be used this way. He only explains which paper should not be used. That suggests the basic practice was already familiar to his readers. By the 14th century, paper for personal hygiene was being produced in China in large quantities. And in 1393, thousands of specially made sheets were produced for the imperial family. Some were soft and perfumed. Think about the difference. In one part of the world, people were still choosing between water, fabric, and whatever nature happened to provide. Meanwhile, the Chinese imperial court was receiving purpose-made scented toilet paper. So why did the rest of the world not immediately do the same?
The answer was simple. For a very long time, paper was too expensive. It was needed for books, records, letters, and official documents. Very few people could afford to use a good sheet once and then throw it away. So throughout the Middle Ages, people continued relying on water, cloth, plants, and other available materials, and there was no single method used across all of Europe or Asia. People living close to water were more likely to use water. In rural areas, plants, straw, and other natural materials were readily available. Wealthier households might use cloth. In many cultures, washing with water remained a central part of personal hygiene. The real history is more complicated than the simplified version people sometimes tell. It is not accurate to say that one part of the world was always clean while another part never washed. Different cultures simply had different habits, different materials, and different ideas about what was practical or comfortable.
The biggest changes began once printed paper became cheaper. Newspapers, magazines, and mail-order catalogs started appearing in ordinary homes. After people finished reading them, throwing them away felt wasteful. So paper quickly found a second use. A newspaper could be cut into smaller sheets or simply hung nearby. A catalog might help someone choose boots, tools, or furniture. Then, once it had been read, it could solve a very different household problem. In rural parts of North America, dried corn cobs are also often mentioned. They were easy to find, left over after the harvest, and cost absolutely nothing. Today that sounds strange, but to someone living at the time, a free corn cob may have seemed far more sensible than buying paper made specifically to be thrown away. The idea of paying for a disposable bathroom product had not yet become normal.
In 1857, an American businessman named Joseph Gaiety decided toilet paper should become a product of its own. He began selling what he called medicated paper for the water closet. It did not come on a roll. Customers received a package of separate flat sheets. Gaiety advertised it almost like a medical product. He argued that ordinary printed paper was too rough and could irritate the skin. But the most memorable detail was something else. Gaiety's own name was printed on the sheets. Modern business advice tells entrepreneurs to place their branding where customers will remember it. Joseph Gaiety took that advice to a particularly bold place. Still, the product did not become an instant success. Newspapers and catalogs were almost free. Gaiety's paper cost money, and customers had to walk into a shop and ask out loud for special toilet paper. For people in the 19th century, that could be deeply embarrassing.
I cannot hear you, sir.
Manufacturers did not only have to create the product, they had to convince people that buying it was normal.
By the end of the 19th century, toilet paper began taking the form we recognize today. Inventor Seth Wheeler's several patents connected to paper rolls, perforation, and roll holders. Paper could now be wound around a cardboard core, hung next to the toilet, and torn off one section at a time. On one old patent drawing, the loose end hangs over the top of the roll, so supporters of the paper over position finally have a historical argument in the endless debate. Although a patent drawing is unlikely to change the mind of anyone who has always hung it the other way. The first rolls were still fairly rough. Paper manufacturing was imperfect. Later, some companies even advertised their toilet paper as being splinter-free. Imagine a modern package whose biggest selling point says, "Now without splinters." Not softer, not scented, not 4 layers. Just no unpleasant surprises. During the 20th century, toilet paper became softer, cheaper, and more convenient. Extra layers appeared, along with patterns, scents, and different roll sizes. Little by little, a product people once felt embarrassed to buy became an ordinary household necessity. We have traveled from leaves, snow, and smooth stones to broken pottery, wooden sticks, newspapers, and the first purpose-made sheets of paper. That journey took humanity thousands of years. Today, toilet paper feels so ordinary that we barely notice it, until it runs out. So the next time you see an empty holder, remember, history offers quite a few alternatives. But checking the cupboard is probably still the better idea. What modern item could you not live without for even one day? Tell me in the comments. Maybe its story will become the subject of our next episode.